So hello and welcome to this debut edition of JLF Seattle. Alka and I will talk for about 30-35 minutes and then open the floor for questions. So please make a mental note of your questions. Welcome to Seattle.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I wanted to start this conversation by asking you to please give us a brief synopsis of each of your novels so that we can set the rest of the conversation in context.
Okay, great. So listen, before I get started, I wanted to say thank you to Devika, who is keeping us on schedule and doing a great job, introducing everybody. And I'm so excited to be here at JLF Seattle, which is the very first Seattle JLF, right? And to be able to have all of these amazing speakers and then an audience that is so engaged in all of the subjects. Okay, so the three books in the trilogy were inspired by my mother because unlike her, I had the opportunity to do all the things that she didn't get to do. So she, told me from a very early age, you're going to decide your career, you're going to decide where you want to go to school, you'll decide whom you're going to marry, you'll decide whether or not you want to have children. I didn't get to do any of those. I didn't get to make those decisions. So I wanted to create in fiction for her a life that she didn't get to have, and this is where Lakshmi is born. So the Henna Artist is about a woman named Lakshmi who leaves her marriage after 2 years because it's not serving her, and she decides to forge a new life for herself as a henna artist and an herbal healer, which is something in 1955 when the book takes place, something that a woman with no education could actually, have done. And she doesn't have the privilege of going to a fabulous university. Then came The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, which was about Malik, her 8-year-old helper in the henna artist. And he had the opportunity to go to the very elite Bishop Cotton School in Shimla, if anybody knows about that. And so he has grown into a 20-year-old young man by the time this novel starts. And I wanted to explore, and I know this may seem strange to those of you who don't write fiction, but you know how, and you'll know this, Indu, sometimes your characters tell you what they want to have you write, how they want you to tell their story. So that's what happened with Malik. He wanted me to explore what kind of a young man he has become now that he has gone from street child to very privileged young man. And in this one, I got a chance to write about the nomadic tribes who crossed the Himalayan mountains because I don't think a lot of people know about them. They still exist, and they are often used as mules for drugs and gold. So we get into that a little bit. And then the third book came about because the third main character of the trilogy, Radha, who was an obstreperous 13-year-old in the henna artist, becomes a perfumer in Paris. She's married to a Parisian. She has 2 little girls. And once again, I wanted to explore what happened to her in the intervening 17 years when we catch up to her here. How has she changed? Has she become the kind of adult that we would hope she has become, even though she was such a rebellious teenager? So that's how it all played out.
Thank you. And so you didn't intend to write 3 novels when you started?
I didn't even intend to write 1 novel in my life.
I see.
So, I mean, it was something that was forced on me, basically, because I was 51 years old, and the 2008 recession meant that I had a lot less business in my marketing and advertising agency. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And, like a lot of married people, I don't listen to my husband very often. But at some point I thought, well, he's always said that I could write novels. He's always said I could write fiction. And what is advertising but a bunch of fiction anyway? And so I decided, okay, well, let me enroll in a master's program where I could really accelerate the process of learning how to write novels. So that's what I ended up doing. And so that's how the first novel came about. And then the second novel came about because The Henna Artist had gone off to the printers, and that's about a 6-month process, as you know. It goes off to the printer, there's copy editing, proofing, there's all this other stuff that happens, and then it goes to the distribution houses where your book is going to be put on shelves. And so while that was happening, the second character, that Malik kept saying, you got to write my story. So I started writing his story. I'd written about 20 pages, and my agent said, let's send this off to the publisher and see what they say. And so the publisher sent a second contract right away. And that was before the Henna Artist was even on the shelves. And so she was like, okay, we got a good thing here. Let's keep going. So when the second novel came out and was published and then became a bestseller, she said, okay, what else do you have, Alka? So I said, well, I could write a third novel about Radha, the third main character, because I've given the first 2 books to the other 2. So I went ahead and said, okay, I can write this third novel about Radha. And she said, can you write me 20 pages so I can send it off to the publisher? And I said, I don't have time. Like, I'm traveling, talking to people about the books. So she said, write me a couple of paragraphs, just a synopsis or something. So I wrote that, and then they gave us a third book contract. So there was no plan to do a trilogy in the beginning, but there was a sort of, organic happening. Now, my editor kept saying, stop calling it a trilogy. This could go on forever. So, so she said, if you call it a trilogy, that means it's over. And a reader has pointed out to me, hey, listen, you've got Star Wars, which has a prequel, and then another prequel, and then a trilogy, and then a sequel, and a sequel, and sequel. So she said, don't worry about it. You can just keep going forever. But for the 4th novel, I decided to do something a little different. But I think I'll come back to these characters.
That's amazing. When you talked about advertising being fiction, I have degrees in economics, and I turned to writing fiction, and I always say it was an easy transition because economics is so much fiction. Every time you run an economic model, it's other things being equal, and other things are never equal. So,
well, and also Indu, Priya just said in one of the previous sessions, she said that science is a messy business. And in science, we are always using our imagination to, coming from 100 different directions to make a concept. And I thought, well, that's just like writing. Because we are using all these ideas that are floating around in our heads and from research and talking to people. And we are also, it's a messy thing. And then finally, you want to have something concrete at the end, which is your novel or your short stories.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to explain what we do. I wanted to talk a little bit about your MFA, the Master of Fine Arts and Creative Writing that you got from the California College of the Arts. Right. You've credited the program with the inspiration to write, and you probably wrote the first novel during the program. Tell us a little bit about what sort of classes you took, how they helped you, and whether there was something beyond the program, a bonus that you hadn't expected when you enrolled in the program. And then maybe just on the flip side, do you really need an MFA to be a successful writer? Could you have done it without it? Could anyone else write without an MFA? And I'll make a full disclosure, I don't have one. So.
I know what my answer is going to be. So I think that, So I think that like most everybody here, I'm a self-directed person. And I really pay attention to the process of how you go about doing something. So I said to myself, if I've got 2 years before the recession abates and I have to go back to my marketing and advertising business, I've got 2 years in which to make something of this. So what can I do? I want to look at a program where they have people who have published things in the last 5 years. So the professors have to be experienced and know the market that's happening right now. They have to have maybe agents under their belt right now who could possibly publish my own work. Then the other thing that I looked for are very intense classes and sort of being able to experiment with different kinds of classes. So a class in historical fiction, a class in poetry, a class in documentary filmmaking. I did all of those kinds of things. And so my MFA, which was so intense and had lots of workshops where I was writing portions of the Henna Artist and workshopping them, and then other people were putting their work forward for the rest of us in class to workshop. I think that that was a really great way for me to learn because I had a limited amount of time in order to make it happen. Now, at the same time, it was a busy time for me because I was also going back to India with my mother. And we went to Jaipur, which is where my younger brother had bought a condo. So he said, look, you guys, I'm not at the condo. I'm actually living in Shanghai. But if you guys want to come, you know, you can stay for as long as you'd like. And I went there with my mother 4 times while I was in the program. So for me, it was fruitful because at the same time I'm learning to write, I'm going to India, I'm meeting with people, I'm interviewing Ayurvedic doctors and henna artists and people who were alive in the post-independence era, which is what I'm writing about. So for me, it was great to be able to do the master's program in 2-year period and to have all these experiences coalesce in a short period of time. But I think some other folks who want to write, and I get approached by readers all the time who say, I've got a memoir in me, or I've got short stories in me, or I've got a novel in me, where do I get started? And I always say, look for a workshop, look for something where you can physically be present, because I do think it makes a difference whether you're on Zoom or whether you're physically present with your work. You know, try to find some kind of a workshop where you can vet your work. Basically, you find out how other people are looking at your work, and then you find out how to do your work itself. And one of the things I always say is nobody writes a book by themselves. Nobody writes a book by themselves. And you know this. We have so many people who are giving us feedback. My agent made my book so much better. She held the book for 8 years and kept me working on the book for 8 years for the Henna Artist before she would let it out of the gate. And I used to get so mad at her, and I quit writing 3 different times. I gave up on the book because I said, why can't you send it out? And she said, this isn't like applying for a job. This is, you get one chance with a publisher. You have to have a full manuscript, and you have to make sure that it is the best manuscript you can put out there, that it is going to sell well. So the publisher gives you a 2nd contract and a 3rd contract, and you become a full-time author. So it's really important to have, by the way, an agent like that. So my agent helped me make the book better. She made lots of suggestions. And then my publisher's editor made the book a whole lot better. I had independent editors I hired to work on the book that made it a lot better. Everybody made the book so much better. So I tell people, if you want to learn how to write, you have to learn to listen. And at some point, you get the idea that, okay, this comment is going to make a lot of sense to my work. I'm going to listen to that. Maybe those comments are really not what I intended to do, and I don't want to, you know, listen to that. It's not going to help my work. So, you know, you get really good at figuring out, when you get all these different sources of feedback, you get really good at figuring out what's going to work for you and what's not.
So I'm going to, one thing you said about your agent holding the book for 8 years. So essentially it took you about 10 years from when you started your MFA to get published. That was 2020. And then in 2021, you published The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, which is Malik's book, and Lakshmi plays a huge role in it also. Lakshmi is the main protagonist of the first novel. And then 2 years later, you published, you told us how that came about from a business point of view. Okay, they're interested, let's give them something. I get that. But how, and then you have another new book coming, and we'll talk about that right after this. You have a new book coming out next year. So we're looking at, what are we looking at? 4 books in 5 years, essentially. How did you do that? From a business point of view, it's fine. They want a book, you're like, yeah, I'll write it for you. How do you maintain the quality, which you have done? How do you write so fast? How do you maintain the quality?
Okay. So here, I might say something that's impolitic, but I have to say that I think South Asians are some of the smartest people in the world. And those of you who aren't South Asian, I'm sure you are fabulous as well. But I think that there is something in us that once we learn how to do something, we just keep getting better and better and faster at it. So that's what happened with me. Those first 10 years were really to learn what not to do and to focus on the things that are really important in a novel. So once I learned that, it was so much easier then to write the second book and the third book. Now the trilogy became really easy because I know these characters backwards and forwards after 10 years. And during those first 10 years, I also wrote the future stories of these characters. So I knew what was going to happen in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur. I already knew what was going to happen in The Perfumist of Paris. So it made it really, it was a snap to, just imagine these characters in 1969 in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur and in 1974 in The Perfumist of Paris. And I think that the other thing that helps me is I travel. So my books take place in all kinds of different locales, and traveling there makes a big difference in how I can sensorially have the reader experience being there as well. And to me, when I read a book and it's so palpable, I am there sitting with the character. I am drinking what they're drinking. I am, smelling what they're smelling in the room, whatever. I love that. And so with my books, it's really natural for me to just give that to the reader, to write all of that sensorial input in there.
So does that mean, and this was the question I was going to ask you, because in the Henna Artist you have a village, Agra, Jaipur, Shimla. In the Secret Keeper of Jaipur you have Shimla in great detail because of Nimi, and then you have Jaipur again. And then in the Perfumist of Paris you have Paris and you have Agra. I might have missed a few places, but it's very authentic, the sense of space, at least for me when I read, and me when I visit, and me when I write. For me, a sense of space is it's very important. And if an author makes a mistake in that, then I can't read it anymore, no matter how good the book is. You've done it so authentically. You've done it so well. I mean, have you been to every single one of these places? Have you climbed the mountains with the nomadic tribes in Shimla? I mean, how does that work?
So most of these things I have done. So my brothers and I were born in Jodhpur. We lived in Jaipur, Bikaner, Banswara, and then 1 year we lived in Chandigarh, where my father went to the Punjab Engineering College. So all of that before the age of 9. We used to summer in Shimla when Rajasthan got too hot. My mother was born in Agra, so I have been there with her, at her heritage, house and all of that. Paris, of course, who hasn't been to Paris? It's fabulous, right? Who can't stop going to Paris? But the nomadic tribes of Shimla, no, I had to research that. And then sheep shearing, which is, for some reason, in The Secret Keeper of Jaipur, becomes a big part of that. I've never sheared a sheep, but I can teach myself lots of things through YouTube videos. YouTube is my university. And it's a cheap university. So you can look for anything that you're, wanting to do there. And I do have to confess that Sneha Mathan, who is my fabulous audio narrator, and yours too for your books, who is here today, and I got a chance to meet her in person for the first time, yay. But she asked me in The Perfumist of Paris, did I actually go visit the go-downs where, in still today, fragrances and essential oils are being distilled in Kannauj? And I said, no, but I could see it all on YouTube. And so I could describe it. But I think also, like you, because we have imagination, we can read something or see something and be able to project ourselves into that environment. And both of us are historical fiction authors. And so not only do we have place that we have to describe, but we have to be authentic in the time period that we are writing in. And that just means we do a whole lot of research to get there.
Okay, so now that you mention historical fiction, because I've heard you say that when your publisher first told you that your novel was historical fiction, you weren't very happy about that designation, because the common misconception is that historical fiction is romance, the bodice ripping romance. And the Henna Artist is anything but, although there are some scenes.
Yeah, some juicy scenes.
There are some scenes. Full disclosure, which she writes very, very well. I just have to point out because it's very difficult to write a sex scene. And it's about a woman in the 1950s who's strong, who's powerful, who leaves an abusive marriage. I mean, who did that in the 1950s? Nobody did that. And people still don't do that. And then goes to learn a trade and sets herself up and buys her own house. It's nothing like a romance novel. So my question to you is, what is your understanding of historical fiction through the lens of your own books, and also through the lens of the books of other authors you've admired?
That's a really good question. For me, historical fiction means that we are trying to impart some knowledge about a past that many people will not be familiar with. So when I was growing up in the Midwest, my father came here to get a doctorate in civil engineering at Iowa State University. So that's where we were. I was there for 9, 10, 11 years of my age. And then we went to St. Louis, Missouri, where my dad got his first job, and then to Kansas City, Kansas. And I say this because in the 1960s and early 70s, the Midwest had not seen a lot outside of the Midwest, right? The citizenry had barely traveled outside of the country, much less traveled outside of their state. So people were not familiar with India, and the only things that they knew were things that they had read in their own textbooks, which were very incomplete about India's history. So they didn't understand why India was so poor once the British left. They didn't understand why there were so many people who were out of work, who might be on the streets. They didn't understand anything about the Hindu religion, so they said, why are your cows walking the streets all the time? Why don't you do something about that? Why does your mother wear a dot on her forehead? Why do you guys smell so bad? And it was the curry, right? Nobody had heard of curry back then. So it was really jarring to me as a kid who came from India, who was perfectly happy in India, who knew everything about everybody else who looked like me. All of a sudden, I'm thrust into an environment where nobody understands India. And I thought to myself, I don't know how to speak to them about this. I'm only 9, 10, 11 years old. I can't do that. So for a long time, for 40 years, I wanted nothing to do with India. For a long time, I just said, okay, I am just an American. I came home, I said, Mom, I'm not eating that Indian food anymore because nobody will sit next to me on the bus. And I only want hot dogs and hamburgers and SpaghettiOs. And my mom was completely flummoxed because she's like, I don't know how to make any of those things. And she was a vegetarian, so she had to suddenly start, cooking different kinds of things. The first hamburger she made was 2 inches thick because she didn't know that you were supposed to flatten the patty. So she got all this ground beef and she just sort of made it into a ball, and we couldn't eat it. So Dad took us to McDonald's. That was our first experience at McDonald's. But for so many years, I didn't understand India also, and I didn't know how to talk about it. But in all of those trips that I took with my mother while I was in the MFA program, I got a renewed sense of what India is about because my mother always loved India. She showed me her India every time we went back. And to be able to experience it through the eyes of somebody who understands it and loves it was such an amazing experience. And I thought, oh my God, I come from a really rich culture. I come from a place that has been around long before, the United States, long before the West existed. And there has been so much contribution made by India to everyone else in this world that I thought, you know what, I can write about this. This is something I can give back to the world. My new understanding of India, I can give back to the world. I was listening recently to the JLF London, his name is Sanmath Sangera, and he was talking about Empire Land, which are the books that he has been writing, and how even Indians themselves don't know a lot of their history post-independence. So I felt really privileged to be able to get all of that history into the books. So you're right, I had a real, when they told me that it was historical fiction and that they might be looking at it as a romance book, I really cringed. I just thought, no, that's not what this is. This is historical fiction in a way that lets people know what was happening in India in 1955 and 1969, all the excitement and rebuilding that was going on, the infrastructure was being redeveloped, and I want the world to hear this. I want the world to understand this. And now that it's been translated into 29 languages, these books, I hear from people all over the world saying, I didn't know these things about India. I had no idea. And you've changed my worldview of what India was about.
That's actually really very, you've said it so much better than I could ever have when I get asked that question. Okay, 2 minutes, and I'll ask you a really quick question. You've talked about your mother as an inspiration, the fact that she didn't have many choices, and that led you to write the Henna Artist as an encomium for her. However we are inspired as writers, the one thing that we typically don't do when we are writing is think about the reception the book is going to have, because you just can't write like that. You have to let the book write itself for it to be effective. I've heard back from readers, and a lot of them will tell me their stories, their little stories, how they came to read my books, what they meant to them. And I'm grateful and I'm humble for that experience. What has touched you the most? You must have heard from thousands of readers. What has touched you the most about what they've taken away from your novels, and what was it you hoped they would take away from your novels?
There are women who have written to me about a situation they were in, whether it was abusive or whether it was just a powerless situation. They have read the book and they feel that they can do it too, that they can get out of those situations. And that is just so rewarding. It makes me cry sometimes when I read these letters and emails. I even had a woman from Mumbai call me and say, Alka, I got a BA, then I was arranging a marriage with somebody, and he wouldn't let me work, and so we were living in this apartment. He was abusing me, so I thought, well, if I have a child, everything will be okay. And she delivered a boy, which was even like a huge bonus in Indian terms, and he still was abusing her. So she went to her mother and said, Mom, I am not happy in this relationship. Will you support me if I divorce? And she said, no, I will not. This is it. This is your life. This is your fate. So she went to her sister and asked the same thing, and her sister said, no, this is your life, your fate. I'm not touching this. And so she went to a divorce lawyer, and she said, I got to figure out how to get out of this. And the divorce lawyer said that if you divorce him right now with no income, he will have full custody of the child. And so she said, okay. So every day when her husband left for work, she would put the baby in a stroller, she would walk through the streets of Mumbai, and she was looking for a job. Finally, she found a job, she found a daycare, and so before her husband came home, he had no idea that she was, going around the streets every day like that. So finally, she has enough money, she leases an apartment, and she says to her husband, I'm getting a divorce and I'm taking the baby. And he said, no, you can't. And she said, well, here's my lease, here's my, divorce papers and so on. So finally she does get a divorce, and by the time she called me, she said that she had been on her own now for about 8 or 10 years, and she lived alone with her son, and she was raising him to be a very different kind of young man. He did the dishes, and I said, really? You taught him how to do the dishes? He said, no, he learned all on his own because he said, Mom, you leave the dishes dirty. So, and then she told me that she was blind. it still tears me up because I think, how could a blind woman have had the courage to do something like that? And I said, how did you read my novel if you're blind? And she said, I have a screen reader, and so whatever is on the screen, it's reading out loud to me. And so I just think that the courage of women to escape the kinds of situations that Lakshmi has escaped in the novel really come to life when I read some of these letters. So that's very meaningful to me. Yeah. The other thing, Indu, and maybe you found this in your novels too, is that people say that the books help them escape during a really hard time, either illness or someone's death or the loss of something like a job or whatever. People say these provide comfort to them. These are situations in which they can see hope and renewal.
That's just an amazing story, the one you just said. And yeah, yesterday somebody said something to me about getting my first 2 books when she had knee surgery and she was recovering. So. Because she had to be lying in bed. So, but thank you for listening patiently. Do you have questions for Alka? Can't really see.
Can you tell us something about your 4th book, which is not part of the trilogy?
Well, thank you very much. I planted him in the audience. So the 4th book, as I said, diverges from the trilogy. And once again, I want to talk about another contribution that India has made to the world. The Perfumist of Paris was about India's ingredients. The essential ingredients that go into fragrances all come from the Indian subcontinent. Hello, who knew that? So India is really the perfume capital of the world. And then in the Henna Artist, it's all about those herbal remedies and, chai, and how it was actually a rebellion against British the tea plantations, because British only liked the tea with their milk. Indians put spices in there as a rebellion, like, hey, you want tea from us, we're going to make our own kind of tea. But I like to highlight all of the contributions that India has made to the world. So in the 4th novel, there was a young painter named Amrita Sher Gill, which some of you guys may know about. She was an amazing painter. At a very early age, she became the youngest member of the Paris Salon. She was raised primarily in Europe and came to India late in life in south of India to start painting those kinds of village scenes. She was half Indian and half Hungarian. And she died at the tender age of 28 in 1941. So for a young woman to have accomplished as much as she did in the 30s and 40s, that was amazing. So I don't want people to forget about her, because I think that she made a tremendous contribution to the art world. So 6 Days in Bombay is about a young painter who enters a hospital, becomes very tight with the night nurse, who is also half Indian and half British. So they have a bond of having a dual identity. And the painter dies the same way that Amrita died after a few days in the hospital. But then the nurse finds out that she's been bequeathed 4 paintings by this painter, and it's her responsibility to deliver those paintings all over Europe where the painter loved, lived, whatever. And I have to tell you about Amrita. She is India's Frida Kahlo. She was very flamboyant. She was very confident of her own work. She had her own style. She developed it. And she slept with anything that moved. So I love that. I love the fact that this woman was so bold and so very much knew herself and knew that she could survive anything, even people whispering about her life. So 6 Days in Bombay is about how the nurse finds out how the young woman died, how the young painter died. Yeah. And it's a travelogue that takes you from Bombay to Istanbul, to Prague, to Paris, to Florence, to London, back to Bombay. So if you're dying to travel, please read the book.
So, have you been to all these places?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay.
And we have a street named after authorship.
Yes. And I have been there because of that, yes.
Are there any other questions? So, I had another one.
Yeah.
You, in the Jaipur Trilogy, you have Lakshmi, Malik, Radha. In the writing of the trilogy, you became very, like you said, you spent 10 years with them, you became very intimate with them, they're almost like family to you. It's actually a two-part question. One, did they actually surprise you? Did they, by the time you finished writing the novels, were they different people from who you imagined them to be? And two, what I find fascinating is that in the novels, you become connected with the characters almost right from the first page. How do you teach a new writer how to do that?
Wow. Okay, the first is be over the age of 50 because by then you have lived through so much, right? You've had grief, you've had love and loss, sadness and joy, and you can write about all of those in such depth. Through my MFA program, most of my cohorts were 20, 22, 26, 30, and really the depth of their work wasn't there because they haven't, lived enough life. I think, I don't know, the characters just come out of you, they become you, there's so much of you that goes into characters and you know who you are. So a lot of your characters will have your own, your traits in them. Yeah, I think, and they do evolve, and I think it's because you keep writing about them and keep writing about them. You learn to uncover more and more layers in them. The thing about novels, as you may all know, is that every character has to go through some sort of transformation, every major character. That is the strength of a good novel. So you have to figure out some way to uncover enough about your characters that you can see they have changed by the end of the novel. What has been that transformation?
That's actually, that was what, okay, I've forgotten what I wanted to say.
That also comes after 50.
This is a problem. This is definitely a problem. Actually, there was something you said that started a train of thought for me. We're out of time? Okay. Oh, okay.
I wanted to know, I've read a lot of historical fiction by writers from India. Who is your favorite writer of your era? I won't name the ones I like. You will soon be my favorite when I buy your books and read them. But you can tell me, is there somebody you particularly admire?
See, Alka's almost got to say me.
Indu, for sure.
I'm sitting right next to her, so. But please answer that question.
Well, there have been so many wonderful writers that I have really relied on. I love the stories of Tagore. Those short stories are amazing because I think he really got women. He totally got women, and he was very, I think, empowering towards his own wife and treating women as if they deserved a right to make their own decisions. And of course, I love some of the British writers, the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen. Jane Eyre is, by the way, one of my favorite novels of all time because it's about a girl who is not empowered in life in the beginning, but somehow she finds a sense of herself and finds a way to stand up for herself. I really like that. I like Kiran Desai's Inheritance of Loss. I thought that was a brilliant novel. Rohinton Mysteries, A Fine Balance. Oh my God, what an amazing book that is. What are some of yours?
Well, actually, we're out of time, so. No, but a lot of the ones you've mentioned, I grew up reading a lot of old, dead English authors, so a lot of the ones you mentioned. But thank you very much for all of your patience and for being here. Thank you, Alka.